Now to discuss is Scott Ritter, a former UN weapons inspector and U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer. Scott, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Thank you very much for having me.
Great to have you back on the show. Now, I want to get your take on the latest here, as I know that President Trump is now declaring that the U.S. is going to take over the Strait of Hormuz and get paid for it after criticizing Iran for doing just that. And this comes amid the latest return to strikes between the U.S. and Iran, as Trump says the ceasefire is over. But questions remain as to what the U.S. can accomplish beyond more death and destruction if it continues bombing Iran. So, how do you view the current state of tensions, and do you see this war continuing to escalate?
Well, first of all, I don't see this war escalating to the state that it was in during the original 39-day war, because it can't. Let's not forget we ran out of ammunition, and we haven't acquired massive stockpiles of ammunition to replace it. We topped off a little bit so that we could create the perception of sustainability, but the reality is we can't escalate, because escalate means a return to full scale war with Iran. Iran has more missiles than we do, so the result will probably be the same. What was Einstein famous said? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Um, so you're insane if you think that there's a military solution to this problem. We tried that, been there, done that, got the T-shirt, didn't work. Um, so in Karg Island, well, there's a reason why we didn't take it last time. We can't. Nothing's changed. We don't suddenly have the solution. We haven't magically projected two marine amphibious groups through the Strait of Hormuz, so that they can project their power inland on Karg Island. They're still on the other side of the geographical boundary there. How are we getting the Marines in? We can bring in paratroopers. How do we sustain the paratroopers? Eh, there's a reason why we didn't take it last time, and it's the same reason why we won't take it this time, because it can't be done, not with the forces available. So Donald Trump is basically, playing a game of bluster and bluff. Um, and eventually, the reality will hit home that we can't take the Strait of Hormuz, that Iran will continue to hold it. And I think, a story that's not getting too much coverage right now, Saudi Arabia just bombed Sana'a airfield in Yemen. The Saudi Arabia, that nation that rediverted 70% of its oil production away from Strait of Hormuz transit to the port of Yanbu so it can go through the Bab el Mandeb Straits, which are at you know, this means that they're at the whim of the Houthi. Well, you just bombed them. So I think there's a better and even chance that the Bab el Mandeb Strait will be shut down. Dmitry Medvedev, visiting Iran during the funeral of Ali Khamenei, noted that the Strait of Hormuz was Iran's atomic bomb. The Bab el-Mandeb was Iran's thermonuclear weapon. And so, why did Donald Trump sign the MOU? He himself has admitted it. We had to. We had no choice. We're talking about global economic catastrophe. America was going to run out of oil. We had to sign it so that we could get the oil tanks back up. Well, yay, Donnie, you got them up a little bit, not all the way though. And now you're going back to engage in the same behavior that led to the same situation that prompted you to have to sign an MOU to begin with. And this time it's going to be worse, because the Bab el-Mandeb Straits will be shut. That means no oil is getting out. And so the fact is, this is, I believe, a containing problem that the United States and Iran will eventually stop shooting each other. The MOU, the ceasefire may not be in play, but the MOU is still there. It has to be there, because there has to be hope for some sort of diplomatic solution. And so they'll once again, both sides will say, well, we need to get oil to market, and things will calm down while they pretend that they're going to have negotiations that they will never have. The United States will get oil to market, stabilize the global economy, stabilize the American economy. Iran will inject another, 60 million barrels worth of oil into its economy. And then the United States will wake up to the realization that Iran's not going to yield on any of the issues the United States insists Iran's going to yield on. And once again, we'll begin bombing until a solution is reached. But again, the solution isn't going to be an American victory. We'll lack the capacity to achieve a victory. It's going to be an Iranian victory. It's just how we choose to wrap this poison pill. How we choose to sell it. I mean, solutions are there, but right now it's politically difficult or impossible for the president to accept these solutions. You know, there was an elegant solution where Oman and Iran could have joint control of the Strait of Hormuz, but there would be a premium paid for transit. Trump couldn't handle that. Now Oman's out of the picture. Iran has taken the whole strait. Maybe we can get back to Oman being back in. Who knows? But the bottom line is Iran's not giving up the strait. Why would they? That's their ace in the hole. That's their, that's their their guarantee, their safety margin. They're not giving that up, and Yemen's not going to give up the Bab al Mandeb Strait. So, Trump has no options. He's right now just playing a game of bluster and bluff that's driven by domestic American politics. But because it's driven by domestic American politics, um, when the economic pinch, because again, we all have to remember James Carville's famous phrase put on yellow sticky on the door of the Clinton war room in 1992. It's the economy, stupid. It's the economy, stupid. And as soon as the economy starts to bark, especially with very critical midterm elections coming up in November, Trump will have to respond.
That's a great point, and yeah, good to keep in mind all of those other elements there. And I know you brought up the regional situation, and I wanted to get into that a little bit because it was kind of interesting to watch as Iran was testing the waters a little bit, right? Seeing if they could break this air blockade over Yemen. They were able to do it successfully to get a delegation out to go to the funeral of their former leader in Tehran. And then they brought the delegation back, and all of a sudden, Saudi Arabia starts bombing the Sana'a International Airport. And so when you look at kind of those regional tensions and where things stand, I mean, like you were saying, you're looking at Saudi Arabia going, you guys still want to be able to get your resources out of here, right? It doesn't seem like you do. If you're going to reignite this war here, that's going to be bad for you. But how do you see kind of the position that the region is in and also the position Iran is in handling all of this, seeing just how far it can go and truly how much power it has here.
Remember, Iran has some, I believe, some boundaries put on it. One of its principal allies, China, um, needs Iranian oil to get to China. And so, China can't be in favor of perpetual conflict because that it's like slitting your own throat. And so Iran has to be careful not to outmaneuver itself with its allies. Um, you know, Russia, again, it's complicated. I'm not an economist, and people need to understand that when I speak. I am not an economist. So don't run around. Scott Ritter is good, got a PhD in economy from Harvard University. No, I don't. I have a PhD in life, though. So I'll say this. I was just at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. I heard Vladimir Putin give his speech, and his speech was all about the necessity of stability. Stability, a stable Russia, conducive to the kind of investments that make for long-term economic stability and growth. Um, and the reason why I bring that up is people are like, oh, Russia's benefiting from this. I mean, price of oil got up. Russia sells their oil. They're making money. It's all good for Russia's behind all this. That means you don't understand anything about the economy. Again, I'm not an economist. Didn't stay at a Motel 6. Don't play one on TV. But I've been around long enough to know that, when E.F. Hutton speaks, you listen. And when Vladimir Putin speaks about Russian economy, you listen. Um, you know, how do you get people to invest in Russia? There has to be a healthy, stable investment environment. Um, One of the key things in investing, because everything revolves around energy, are stable, reasonable energy prices. If Russia exacerbates a global climate so that energy prices go up, yes, Russia makes short term economic gains through higher energy prices. Um, but then nobody invests in Russia and Russia doesn't grow. Do you people understand what I'm saying? Now, again, I don't have a PhD in economy. I just have life experience. Russia needs to grow. The Russian president told me so. And he made this his priority. He told me that too. I listen when he speaks. And the key to that is to get people to invest. People invested $84 billion in the future of Russia at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum because they take Vladimir Putin at his word. So Iran needs to be careful here because Iran's playing a game where one of their big allies, Russia, doesn't benefit from these high oil prices. Russia needs regular oil prices, stable oil prices that are attuned to the health of the market. There's a reason. I mean, I don't mean to promote a TV show, but Landman's a hell of a TV show when you want to talk about oil. Billy Bob Thornton, even though he's an actor reading a script, I tell you what, I'll put him on replay all the time when he explains, um, you know, what oil is about and what the price of oil is about. And oil doesn't need to be through the roof. That's bad for business. Oil needs to hit that soft spot where prices are high enough so that the oil men make enough profit so they can continue to do the high capital investment that's required to get oil continuously out of the ground in the future, but keep the price of oil down so that the consumer can buy it with confidence and the economy can function without high inflationary pressures. I'm not an economist. I don't play one on TV, but I think I'm right on this one. So Russia is looking for stability. China needs stability. China needs access to oil. So I think Iran, one of the reasons why I don't believe Iran is just going to jump into the hell's bells go to war thing is because it's bad for Iran. Um, Iran is a nation that has, again, studied the history of Iran. I have. I don't claim to be an Iranian historian. I don't speak Farsi, and there's people out there so much better qualified than I am. But I have life experience enough to know that I've been watching the Iranians since the end of the Iran-Iraq war work to get their economy on track. I followed the work of Rafsanjani when he was president, saw what he did in trying to co-opt the Revolutionary Guard into economic growth for Iran. And I've watched, in succession, the presidents have come after him. Khatami, Rafsanjani, the guy who died, Raisi, the current guy whose name I can't pronounce, Peshkeshkin. Uh,
Kazakhstan, yeah.
they all have one thing in common. They want stability. They're tired of sanctions. They're tired of this. This is not good for Iran. They aren't going to surrender. They're not going to give up. They're willing to pay the price to retain sovereignty. But anybody who believes that it's Iran's goal and objective to go forward in a way that's basically committing economic suicide, this is Iran's golden moment. This is the chance Iran has to play their cards right, which I believe they're doing, to get sanctions lifted so that they can not have to be compelled to pivot to the West all the time. This is what the West has always wanted, to get Iran hurting. And then the only hope for Iran is a repivot to the West so that we can control Iran. Why do you think Mossadegh was kicked out in 1953? It's called British Petroleum. Okay. The British needed to control those assets. The United States, we see that with Donald Trump. The whole reason why this went up. I mean, yes, I buy into Benjamin Netanyahu. Oh, you got to attack. You got to attack. But why was Donald Trump the only president dumb enough to say, okay, we'll attack? Well, if this is such a good deal, why didn't every other president go, yeah, we're in on that one? Why didn't Trump do it the first time around? Because Trump saw something in the global energy market where he thought, especially post Venezuela, he would be able to come in and be able to, China dominates us economically. I'm not an economist, Rachel. I don't have a PhD. I don't play it on TV. I didn't stay at a Motel 6. I'll say this over and over again, but I have life experience. And I know that Donald Trump looks at China and understands China has all the advantages. We have to find some way to contain, control Chinese economic growth, to have some leverage over them at the negotiating table as we try to hammer out what the future is going to look like in a world that's not dominated by the American singularity. So in order to get China to be, somewhat looking to the United States saying, we need you, we have to control global energy markets. Took over Venezuela, and we went into Iran seeking to do the same. And we were seeking to leverage control over Venezuelan markets, Iranian markets, and indirectly Middle Eastern markets to be able to tell China, your growth is dependent upon us. So now we need to talk. You don't get to hold supply chain dominance over our heads. Not an economist. I'm using fancy words, but I do understand these concepts. And so I think, this game that's being played right now, it's not about Iran's nuclear program. That's a political throwaway. Um, it's not about Shia versus Sunni. Hell, China already solved that problem, having the Iranians sit down with the Saudis and have a rapprochement. It's about Donald Trump forcing this war on the world in a gambit to gain control of Iran's energy. He and I'm still this is one that I'm still wrestling with. You know, analysts are allowed to update their analytical models. I hope people understand that. What makes a good professional analyst is the ability to say, huh, maybe there's some new information out there. You know, one of the popular things, and I bought into it early on, and I still lean in this direction, is that Trump was overly influenced by Benjamin Netanyahu and the Mossad into believing that Ali Khamenei regime could collapse. But there's a problem there. Nobody else believes it. Nobody else believes it. The CIA doesn't believe it. State Department doesn't believe it. Nobody believes it. Maybe Pete Hegseth, but who cares? Um, if you're relying upon his, intellectual acumen, you're in trouble. But
Yeah.
Trump went to war claiming, that this was the thing. I'm beginning to think that Trump knew that this wasn't. I think Trump wants chaos. I think Trump thrives in this chaos. Um, and which also leads me to reevaluate, my predictions about midterm elections and the vulnerability of Trump. There's things happening at the local level, state level, et cetera, gerrymandering, you know, um, you know, in-person only voting and all that kind of stuff that is undermining a lot of the infrastructure that the Democrats relied upon in 2020 to steal the election from Donald Trump. I'm not saying they violated the law, but they themselves admit that while they weren't anti-constitutional, they were extra-constitutional, meaning that they operated outside the framework of the Constitution to manipulate the system in a way that gave them an advantage over Donald Trump. And I think Donald Trump believes that he has the magic code, so to speak, to do the same thing. I'm not accusing him of breaking the law. I'm just saying that with a compliant Congress, compliant state legislatures, a compliant court system, that things are happening right now in terms of elections that give Donald Trump confidence that he will emerge from November still in power, um, still in control of the House, and not threatened by a Senate conviction. Um, I'm not convinced that's it. It's just it's in my head now. I'm percolating on this because he's not a stupid man. I mean, we can criticize him all we want, but he's not a stupid man. He's not a fundamentally stupid man. And he does think strategically. And it would be so unlike Donald Trump to buy into a simplistic Iran will collapse when we kill the supreme leader model. I fell into that. Because I believed that Israel had the leverage over there, but there's some complexities in the U.S.-Israeli relationship, especially the Israeli-Trump relationship, that make me think that may not be all that it seems. And so I'm now leaning more towards uh, Trump as an agent of chaos, deliberate chaos, and that this memorandum of understanding is part of a larger plan to inject chaos across the board. Because look at how this is playing. This impacts Russia. This impacts NATO. This impacts Europe. This gives Donald Trump the ability to have his finger on the pulse of the global economic health. And sometimes it isn't so much that you have to have the finger on the pulse in order to cure the victim. Sometimes you maintain. I mean, what is that Munchausen syndrome where you you pretend somebody's sick or something like that? Trump
Yeah,
may be making the world sick so that they look to him as the guy who can cure them, but he deliberately keeps them sick so they keep looking back to him. Um, you know, this is the kind of thinking that's going through my head right now because otherwise what's happening in the Middle East makes no sense. But I do believe that Donald Trump understands that Iran can't turn its back on Russia and China. This gives Donald Trump leverage, indirect leverage over Russia and China to play this game in the Middle East with Iran. So there's a lot going on right now that I think every analyst of the Middle East needs to take pause and reflect carefully on what's going on. I'm not an economist. I don't claim to be one, but the economy is such an important role, and it's none other than James Carville, who likewise was an economist, but he taught me it's the economy stupid, and those words, "it's the economy stupid," need to resonate in every analytical model being built right now, and if if you do that, I think you'll see the picture becomes clear, but in a way that nobody really thought, because there's so much emphasis placed on Israel, on the Zionist cabal, on the control of Zionism. And I don't know. I spend a lot of time listening to Scott Bessent, um, who spends a lot of time talking about control of oil markets. And the fact that Donald Trump keeps him so close and listens to him, and it leads me to believe that the oil markets are, play a bigger role here than, say, Greater Israel.
Yeah, and I think that that's a good thing to keep in mind as you're watching this play out because, like you're saying, I mean, the US is looking at China and they're going, okay, we can't compete with China economically. So, how do we get to China? Oh, we try to control global energy flow. And that also hits at Russia, exactly as you're saying. And that gets back to the US and its ongoing war on the key pillars of the multipolar world because how else are we going to target them? And while I have you here, I did want to get more into the Russia of it all because I know that obviously the NATO proxy war against Russia is still ongoing. You've got Trump and Ukraine kind of riding high on this promise that they're going to get the license to produce Patriot missiles. Obviously, we know that that's not going to happen, not going to end well. And when it comes to the latest headlines that we're seeing, right, they're really amping up the Ukrainian drones here in the West as if they are just wreaking havoc all across Russia. They are changing this war, bringing Russia to its knees, while ultimately they're not changing the balance of power on the battlefield or what Russia is currently doing when it comes to targeting Ukraine's fortress belt in the Donetsk region. So, how do you see the current state of that war and kind of where things are headed?
Well, Rachel, you're in luck. I just got back from Russia, where I spent 22 days, I think, starting at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum and ending back. But what's interesting is drones dominated every aspect of this trip. The day I arrived in St. Petersburg, 96 drones were launched by Ukraine through the Baltics to strike St. Petersburg. The day I left St. Petersburg, on the train, the Sapsan heading back to Moscow, internet message comes in. There's going to be internet disruption because of ongoing Ukrainian drone attacks against St. Petersburg. You get to Moscow. Moscow has drone attacks. I went down to the Donbass, arrived in Lugansk, air raid sirens blowing because Lugansk was being pounded by drones. Went to Starbelsk the next day, got chased out of Starbelsk by Ukrainian FPV drones who were trying to take me out. Went to Donetsk, where, to visit the city of Orlovka, which is, former frontline city. You've got to basically drive under drone nets until you can't. And then you're sprinting past blown up cars, blown up trucks, blown up gas stations, trying to get into what hopefully is an area of safety, not because the drones don't fly, but just because you're not the only target on the highway anymore. You're now surrounded by buildings and everything else. And so the drones have more targets to choose from. And you might be able to disappear into into the chaff. I went to Zaporozhye. Melitopol was hit by drones every night that I was there. Electricity and water was out. You know, I was supposed to go to Kherson, couldn't because the highway was literally the highway of death. And they're like, no, I was supposed to visit the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. Couldn't. It was the highway of death. In fact, Melitopol got so bad that my security team said, you got to go. And so we left, and the convoy as we drove out got attacked by drones, American-made drones, by the way, Hornets. Yay, Eric Schultz. Someday I'll meet you. Eric Schmidt, I think, the head of Google, founder of Google. But the thing is, these drones are a reality. There's just no doubt about it. And I focused my visit to this region, to the Donbass, to the new territories, on drone warfare. I was able to interview Russian frontline drone units, go to the training centers, go to drone research centers. I interviewed Dmitry Rogozhin, the head of former head of Roscosmos, today the commander of Bar Sarmat, which is an advanced drone unit. I visited the Archangels unit that does drone research and development. Had in-depth talks about drone warfare. Let's just be clear: the Ukrainians are making life difficult for the Russians. But the one thing I saw with every Russian was no panic. I mean, Dmitry Rogozhin, yeah, it's a little tough right now. But he's like, yeah, no, we got this thing sorted. We've already broken down Starlink, and we're going to start shutting it down. Well, they're doing that right now. Nobody's talking about it because that's not the message that wants to come out. The Hornet's no longer as effective as it once was because the Russians are sort of shutting it down. The FP1 drones, they're not flying in the numbers that they are anymore because all the factories got blown up and they're not able to produce them in the same numbers to sustain a launch rate. There's a reason why they launched 555 drones because they have a less than 10% success rate. The Russians shoot down, 500 plus. Only a handful get through the target. They have a 60-kilogram warhead that goes pop, pop on a, you know, has anybody ever been to an oil refinery and taken a look? You go visit an oil refinery. Go look at the nature of these units. These are units that operate under high heat, high pressure. That means that the steel that's used in it is very thick steel, very strong steel. This isn't thin paper stuff. So a 60-kilogram warhead comes in and goes pop. Maybe it breaks the line starts burning, but that's not the end of the reason. They'll just shut it down. But I went to the I used to be a firefighter and I've been trained in oil field firefighting. I went to an academy in Nevada that basically has giant oil refinery mock-ups where they blow things up, put it all on fire, and you come in and foam it out, take it down. Um, Crews are trained to do that. And so the things go pop, you get this momentary flash, and everybody goes, "Oh my goodness, look at this. Isn't this terrible?" And the Russians go, "Yeah, bad. Shut her down, put it out, repair it, get it back up. Let's go. Let's get her done." And that's the Russian approach. Um, so bad things are happening, but they're not fatal. And the Russians are not panicking. Vladimir Putin went on national TV and said, "Yeah, we got an issue." He brought in Novak, deputy prime minister, who went, "Yeah, we're not going to sell diesel to the world anymore because we got to keep the diesel in country because we got to keep our trucks running." Right? And people are like, "Oh my God, it's the collapse of Russia." But they did that last year. Nobody tried to collapse Russia then, or they did, but it didn't happen. It's just standard operating procedure. When you have a shortage, I mean, if I'm in the business of giving something away that I need because I have an excess amount and suddenly I don't have enough for me, I stop giving it away. I keep it. And if I can't produce something, I buy it. Um, that's the way the world works. Russia's adapting to the reality. The question then is, can the Ukrainians sustain this pressure? And the answer is no. Because as we speak, for instance, the FP1 drone, which is their heavy lifter in these long range strikes, they're losing their ability to navigate the target. Now, does this mean that they'll never get through? No, of course they'll get through. I mean, just the simple tactic of flooding a zone alone means that air defense systems are going to get exhausted. But the Russians are making up for it because the FP1 drone was dumbed down. People understand this that when the Russians were stealing the Starlink technology from Elon Musk and using it to guide their own drones into Ukrainians saying, "Wait a minute, the Russians are blowing the hell out of us. You got to shut it down, Elon." Elon said, "Okay, well, we're going to throttle it down." And so, one of the things they use is this aviation package for the mini Starlink antenna. And that, it was allowing faster Russian drones to come in. And Elon once said, "We're going to throttle it down to, I think, 60 or 70 kilometers per hour or miles per hour." That meant that the fast Russian drones now were too fast for the Starlink antenna. So Russians are out. But what that means is that the Ukrainian drones, the FP1s that use this, they're flying in that sweet spot, that slow speed spot. And you know what? That's not that fast. Go to the highway, take a little car going, 60 miles an hour. You can track it with a machine gun. You lead it heavy enough, there's the solution. The Russians have mobile guns all over the place shooting these things down. I went to the Burovesnik unit. Uh, they've got these AI drone. They're sending these Molina drones up there with AI, and they're running just a search pattern. They're sitting there searching, and if the FP1 drones come in, they ram them, blow them up, bring them down. So now there's a whole anti-drone net. The Russians are building these interceptor drones, Stingers, and the FP1 comes in, and they just point, shoot. They're very cheap. They'll shoot it down, and they're disseminating them everywhere. The Ukrainians aren't able to fly drones. They're building these FP5 flamingos. Had some success early on, but the last time they launched a mass attack, they tried to strike in the Izhevsk region, Vodkinsk machine building plant, where I worked as an inspector back in the 1980s. But they can't fly them normally because the Russians have air defense, so they flew them along the rivers. Um, they all got shot down. Why? Well, because the Russians have figured out that their standard air defense radars maybe are the things are flying beneath them. So they put the A-50s up there, they're AWACS that's looking down, and they're detecting them. And they picked them up, tracked them, shot them down. The Russians have a solution to every problem that Ukraine and the West have put together. The West does not have this magic bullet that just scares the crap. Will the West get some technology coming? There, future advances are being made with mesh networking, thing. It's like internet stuff. I don't truly understand. I'm not an economist. I'm not a technologist. I've experienced, but they, and some AI stuff. But you know, the AI stuff. The New York Times has published an article about this top secret German factory that's building drones for the Ukrainians, and it's cutting edge stuff. And I'm like, really? Let me read. Wait a minute. It's we now know what it is. It's a Helsing SE. It's a Bavarian-based company right outside of Munich. It's not that top secret. We know where the factory is, and we know what they're producing. And they're selling two models of drone, HF1 and X2 something. Um, they use AI. Well, they're giving them to the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are going, it doesn't work. There's three different AI components and they don't work. There's a failure to launch rate of 75%. If you can't launch a drone the first time out, you're going to die because the Russians have brought in all the, you know, ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, blanketing the area. And they're using AI to rapidly assess images and find anomalies, looking for patterns of life. And so you may have a window of opportunity measured in like 30 seconds to a minute to come out from cover, launch a drone, and get back to cover without the system, the matrix getting you. So, but if you come out, assemble a drone, and go launch, and it doesn't launch, and you go launch again, and it doesn't launch, you're dead, literally dead, because the Russians will find you. They'll hit you with Iskander. They'll hit you with Fab 500s. They'll kill you. This is reality. Look, the Ukrainians are doing the same thing. If the Russians screw up, they die. It's a dangerous war. But the point is, the Russians are doing a better job. Now, why don't we know this? Because we have this is a huge information operation being run by the British and the CIA. The goal here isn't just to convince, it's hard to convince the Ukrainians that they're winning the war because they know the truth. They know the truth. They know they're not winning the war. They know they're losing. The drone operators know they're being slaughtered every day. 80 to 100 of Ukraine's experienced drone operators are being slaughtered by the Russians. Slaughtered by the Russians because the Russians have figured it out. They play the game better than the Ukrainians. Um, but what the Ukrainians are pushing for here isn't to convince themselves they're winning. They're to convince the Russians that they're not winning, to convince the Russians that maybe they're losing, to create a debate inside Russia that could lead to problems for Vladimir Putin. Everybody's hanging their hat on September 20th right now in the state Duma elections, basically to push United Russia out, to create a trigger of uncertainty, to see a collapse of Putin's popularity, to get a Moscow Maidan moment. And this has been the fantasy, the wet dream of the West ever since this war started, a Moscow Maidan moment to get people up. They thought they had it when Prigozhin and Wagner started marching towards Moscow. They misread that situation totally. Putin is not weak, but the West believes he's weak. So what we're seeing with this whole drone campaign is a giant propaganda exercise, propagating lies that's being echoed in social media. Rachel, you know this. Go on X right now. Look at the dominance of the algorithm. I mean, I'm getting Richard Woodruff telling me how great his damn drones are. Richard, you're a dead man walking. You're not going to survive much longer because they're hunting you. Like, because you're a drone operator, you build drones. Lindsey Graham, God bless his soul, rest his soul, whatever. Mama said, never speak ill of the dead. But Lindsey Graham went to Kiev and walked around a drone factory and broadcast pictures. Hey, look at me holding a big dick. I mean, holding a big drone. Boom, dead. Now, I'm not saying that's what killed him. I'm saying that Lindsey Graham stupidly led the Russians there because the Russians have AI generated. They look at every image. I don't want to give away the farm, but hell, everybody knows what's going on. When you build, if you're the Ukrainians, you're stupid, as they are now, because you have to learn how to do this. The Russians are smart. They learned it from their mistakes. There's a reason why I wasn't allowed to visit Rubicon. And the reason is the Russians learned the hard way that the last time they let somebody visit Rubicon, people actually took pictures. And then the Ukrainians, AI went, we know where Rubicon is. And they started launching drones against it. And the Russians were like, no, screw that. So Scott Ritter's going, I really want to visit Rubicon. They're like, we like you, Scott. We trust you. But no, we're not letting you anywhere near because the Ukrainians are tracking. We're not going to let you help them. Whenever a facility is built, Western investors come in, Ukrainian construction, and they take pictures and they put the pictures on the internet. Now, for you and I, because we're not looking for obscure construction sites related to furniture stores, because that's how this place was started, We don't care. We don't care that in the corner there is a unique door configuration that's unique to that building or unique to several buildings like it. But the AI cares. The AI has picked up on that. And so now Lindsey Graham comes out and goes, hey, look at me. And in the background's a little shadow of a door with red thing. And AI goes, we know where that place is. And the second the Russians figure out where it is, the Iskanders are launched and boom, everything gets destroyed. This is the reality of Ukraine today. They can't do anything without the Russians taking them out. And the Russians don't go pop. The FP1, 60 kilograms of high explosive, pop, pop, pop. The Russians come in and go boom, 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 you're dead. And this is happening on a daily basis. The Ukrainians are being wiped off the face of the earth. So this is a race against the clock. And right now the question is that there's a belief in the West that Vladimir Putin is vulnerable, that there is a chance, and they get it. You know, again, how do they get this? Well, they watch people like Ksenia Sobchak, a very noted Russian. She did an interview with me, but she's very liberal and she's reflective of a segment of Russian society that is beholden to the West and believes in the West and wants to be part of the West. And they wear their Chanel and they wear their, you know, the Gucci and their well, their whatever. I know you know these things better than me. I don't mean to pick on you, but I don't know anything about this kind of stuff. But you know, they think that the West is superior somehow to Russia. They've never bought into the Russia as a standalone civilization, the thing that Vladimir Putin has, you know, imbued after 26 years of rebuilding Russia. Um, and the West listens to them. And it's like this self-propagating mythology here, where the West says Russia's weak, and the Russians inside Russia go, "We're weak," and we go, "See, they say they're weak. They're weak. We can exploit them. We don't like Putin. Putin's weak. We think we can bring Putin down. We Moscow Maidan moment. Let's go!" And everybody jumps in because it's the only choice they have left. Rachel, they're losing on the battlefield. They can't beat the Russians. They're not winning the drone war. Trust me on this one. I just came from there. I was honest with you. I told you that it's hard. I'm not pretending the Ukrainians aren't doing a good job. They're doing a hell of a job. The Russian soldiers, everyone I spoke to, had nothing but the highest regard for their Ukrainian counterparts because they know if they make a mistake, they die. That's the reality. It's a very, very hard war right now, but the Russians are winning. There's no panic in the Russian military. There's no panic in the Russian civilians. The civilians of the Donbass are some of the toughest people you'll ever meet in your life. These are people who haven't been at war since 2022. They've been at war since 2014, a war where the Ukrainian government has targeted them, called them terrorists, said your children are going to live in basements, and they're pounding them. I went to a Ukrainian clothing store, or a Donbass clothing store, and I got a shirt, built under fire I can't say it in Russian because my Russian's horrible, but it's a shirt that symbolizes the fighting spirit of these people, built under fire. We have been built under fire. Understand that they've been living this life since 2014. It's now 2016. All right. So that's math, basic math, 12 years. If you were 10 years old in 2014, you're 26 today. All you've known is war. All you've known is this. And they're not quitting, Rachel. They're not running away. They're not saying give up. They're not saying compromise. Ksenia Sobchak's saying compromise. She's saying that the Russian mothers don't want to send their sons and daughters, their sons, to fight and die in this war. But I asked her in a part of the interview that she conveniently cut out. I said, what part of Russia are you willing to die for? I mean, what is real Russia for you? Obviously, you don't think the Donbass is, but you know who does? The people who live in the Donbass. They believe they're Russian. They know they're Russian. And they're willing to die for and they are dying. They are sacrificing. They're not quitting. They're never going to quit. And the vast majority of Russia believes the same thing. And that's why the mothers in Tver, the mothers in the Buryat Republic, the mothers in Vladivostok, the mothers everywhere are going to say, my sons, my husbands, my brothers, my uncles are going to go to this war and they're going to stay the course until this war is won. We don't understand it if we don't go there. If we stay here in the United States, we get fed the propagandist crap that's coming at us from the mainstream media, from social media, et cetera. Go to Russia and see the Russians. Come and see with your own eyes this reality. And when you do, you'll understand that everything you're being told by the West is a lie. This doesn't mean that it's not hard. Are there gas lines? Yes, there's gas lines. Is there rationing? Of course there is. Are people pissed off? Who wouldn't be? Wouldn't you be pissed off if you had to stand in line to get gasoline? But does that mean you quit? The hell with Texas. I'm done with Texas. I'm running away from Texas. Why? Because it's hard. Well, last time I saw that Texas was born from hard experience, the Alamo, Goliad. I mean, we can go on and on and on. San Jacinto, Texas was born from hard experience. She was born from hard experience, the hardest experience possible, the Great Patriotic War, 27 million dead. And you think the Russian people are going to abandon that history? They're not. This is why they fight so hard to preserve their history. Russians don't allow people to reinvent Russian history. They take umbrage at that. Why? Because it's essential. Russian history is to Russia like the American Constitution is to America. We would fight against anybody who tried to change the Constitution willy nilly because that's what defines us. Russian history defines Russia. They're not going to let people come in and redo their history. And yet, that's what the collective West is doing right now. You have NATO, you have Europe, you have people in the United States who believe that we can create the perception of Russian frailty. We believe there's a window of opportunity where the Russian people will abandon everything they stand for and bring down Vladimir Putin simply because we have put out some AI-driven chatbots who have web, Telegram and X channels that Elon Musk and others are promoting. I mean, Elon Musk is playing a very dangerous game here. He says he believes in free speech, but he's manipulating free speech by flooding the zone, with people who are telling lies straight up. And if you challenge these lies, you get throttled down. Now, I haven't had my X account closed down right now, but I'll tell you right off the bat, I'm being throttled about 90% because they don't want this message coming out. I feel bad for you because I know you need your videos to succeed. Unfortunately, when you bring me on, they're probably going to throttle your video as well because this is a message they don't want anybody to hear. But it's the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you bring that up because I was just thinking before we started this interview, I have not seen nearly as many of your posts on X as I used to. They got a little bit of an algorithm change in there. And then now we're in this position where you're having to go search for the people who you actively follow. And so, good to keep in mind, especially for the people who are getting too much of the mainstream media, wondering where are some of these independent journalists and creators and people like yourself who are actually going to Russia, going to see it firsthand, going to talk to people on the ground. I know you are doing a lot of valuable work, and I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today to break down the latest and to share some of your insights here. Scott Ritter, a former UN weapons inspector and U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer. Y'all be sure to check out his work at scottritter.substack.com, where you can actually get it sent to your email and you're not having to rely on the algorithm to see if it shows up. Scott, thanks so much for your time and insight.
Thank you very much for having me. Remember, I'm not an economist.